So today we are going to be talking about when the pie shrinks, how competitive intelligence professionals can impact revenue with our speaker, Brandon Bedford. So with that, I will hand it off to Paul Santilli.
Hi, folks. My name is Paul Santilli. I'm going to share with you a slide here about the SCIP organization. I'm very pleased and proud to have Brandon and Jen from CLUE to join us in this conference call, this webinar, I should say, for today. But I wanted to first take a second to talk a little bit about the SCIP organization. As many of you may hopefully have already seen, that we've gone through a name change as part of our expanded value proposition and our global growth initiatives that we have slated for the future of SCIP and its roadmap. So we are now the Consortium of Intelligence Professionals. We have a large history, legacy of content and the thought leadership that we're pulling from to drive what we like to call this consortium for the betterment of people and planet. For more details, I'll obviously go to our webpage, but to summarize, we have 9 major initiatives that are part of our SCIP value prop. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail because I don't want to bore you through all the detailed PowerPoint content, but the value is definitely there in the individual boxes as we go through our journey on what I like to call the democratization of intelligence, making intelligence pervasive and universal to our community. And whether you're intelligence professionals or not, the content around data-driven intelligence is supremely important in everyday business activities, as well as in your society and personal behaviors. So this is a major expansion in the SCIP community and the SCIP consortium. Having folks like Brandon and Jen from CLUE to talk about some of their expertise and value areas is a major contributor to this consortium idea. So I'm super pleased and proud to have them with us. And with that, I'd like to hand it off to Brandon to start the webinar. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Paul. And thank you to the entire SCIP organization and team for having me here. I will jump into my screen share if you don't mind unsharing there, Paul, and I'll jump right in.
All yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. All right. Today, let me get hopefully everyone can see my presentation here. I'm going to dive right into it today. It is a more challenging business environment than the past many years, perhaps decades. And so today, the presentation is all about how we as competitive enablement professionals can impact our businesses and be most effective when times are tough, when the pie shrinks, if you will. Recently, over the past weeks and months, CLUE has actually surveyed over 300 business leaders to understand how they're navigating difficult market conditions. And this ranges from CEOs, heads of sales, VPs of sales, and chief revenue officers. And so today in this exclusive SCIP webinar, I'm going to be sharing some of these results throughout the session. But more importantly than the results themselves, I want to share some tactical ways that we as compete professionals can best support our businesses today based on what we're learning from this research. And so, in other words, or to put it simply, how do we ensure that everyone across the business understands that competitive intelligence and competitive enablement is a must-have and not a nice-to-have? So without further ado, let's dive in. I'm going to open up with a perhaps not so surprising fact, which is that of these 300 plus leaders that we surveyed, their biggest 3 priorities were 1, hitting revenue targets, 2, improving customer retention rates, and 3, improving sales performance. Right now, when market conditions are tough, everything else is being put on hold. And so this puts us as competitive enablement professionals in a very interesting position. And so also, I'm just going to take a quick pause here before I dive in. In terms of Q&A, please feel free to use the chat. You should be able to drop chat in there. I'm going to be happy to answer those questions throughout, but we'll also have time at the end for live Q&A. But just wanted to call that out because I saw the chat was a little bit bare. But please, I would love this to be interactive. If you have questions, I'm happy to address those as we go through here. And so back to the presentation, you can see, again, this shouldn't be too surprising yet. The top priorities for revenue leaders is to impact revenue. And so what does this mean for us as compete practitioners? I want to really drill into some of the quotes we heard from a particular chief revenue officer of a large software business, which is really to put into perspective how he is thinking about impacting revenue. He speaks of increasing win rate without having to massively expand cost and that trade-off that exists there, or looking at the return on investment and payback to be measurable in the short term. And I think this is a really good kind of example of how competitive is being impacted today. Maybe in 2021 or in prior years, we had the privilege to think more strategically, to think, in terms of 5-year, 10-year plans. Now our businesses are demanding impact today. We want to understand, how can we impact revenue this quarter or next quarter? And so understanding the short-term payback and then also the trade-off between impact and cost is what a lot of revenue leaders are thinking about right now. And so that begs the question, how are we as Compete professionals going to maximize our impact on revenue? And how do we get closer to revenue so that we can do that? I'm going to start with a stat that at first glance might seem like a negative finding, but I actually think there's a lot of promise in this. Out of the, again, 300 plus revenue leaders that we surveyed, 91% of revenue leaders said that their sales deals are becoming more competitive this year. And the reality is, we are no longer in, blue oceans or in green fields or whatever analogy you want to use. The market is getting more competitive. Everyone is fighting for a smaller pie. And so I would love to hear from you. I love seeing all the chat firing off of where people are chiming in from, but I'd also love to hear from you if this resonates. Are you seeing this within your business? Is business becoming more competitive within your company? I, again, thought that this at first glance might seem negative, but for competitive intelligence and competitive enablement teams, this presents a really great opportunity. And that's that we can now support revenue more than we ever have before. And so I'm going to dive right into some tactical tips here from what we've seen, our most successful clients in terms of how they're actually supporting sales teams in these times right now. First and foremost is providing differentiation support directly on prospect and customer calls. This might not be new to some of you, but for some of you, this might be new. Basically, what this means is actually hopping on calls either with the prospect and buyer themselves or the customer, or at the very least, jumping on to support sellers, maybe in a deal desk type of format, to make sure that they're differentiating as best they can in those sales opportunities. And again, even if this isn't new to you and you have some form of direct deal support function, I think another key piece here is to make sure you're doing this with existing customers as well, right? When the pie is shrinking, competitors are going after your happy customers, or perhaps your unhappy customers, and they're looking to steal market share from you. And so being able to support not just new business, but also existing business and upsell and cross-sell is really critical here. Secondly, we want to be able to capture and also share the most effective sales talk tracks. What we mean by talk tracks here, it could be, objection handling techniques. It could be great questions that your top sellers are leveraging in competitive deals. The idea here is looking for those nuggets of gold that those could be in call recordings, or you could simply interview your sellers to understand what are the best tactics that are being used today to eliminate the competition in competitive deal cycles, and then sharing that across the team. Another way I like to think of this is if you found your top competitive seller, what if you could clone them or elements of them to the rest of the selling team? That's what we're really looking to aim for. And I'll show you some more data momentarily that will show why this is even more important right now. And then last, but certainly not least, is spotlighting competitive wins and competitive losses. So when there is a win on the sales team, when a deal crosses the line and it was a competitive deal, we should, as Compete professionals, be understanding, why did we win that deal against the competitor? Again, deals are more competitive right now. And so what worked a few years ago might not be the same thing that worked now if deals are more neck and neck. And so understanding what is working is going to be really helpful to spotlight and share across the team. And perhaps more importantly, and again, if you can get here, I think you're in a really great spot, is building a culture where you are transparent and learning from your competitive losses as well. When we look at our most successful clients, they're not just sharing their wins, but they're sharing their losses. And again, no sales rep enjoys doing this. There's that old saying that goes, a smart person learns from their mistakes, a genius learns from other people's mistakes. And so if you can create a culture where sales reps are transparent and vulnerable, sharing their competitive losses, and you can break those down, you can make the entire team better for it. Just going to take a quick pause here to look through the chat. I saw some questions. Absolutely, we'll be sharing the material of the presentation. So feel free to hit us up via email. And yeah, I'll keep on going, but like I said, keep asking questions in the chat, and I'll address those as we go. So next up, I want to dive in a little bit more into the data here and extrapolate out some more takeaways, because what we've just touched on is kind of tactical direct deal support, which again is really valuable. But from what I know from the SCIP audience, a lot of you, I would imagine, are supporting very, very large sales organizations. Could be hundreds, could be thousands, could be tens of thousands, and there could be multiple business units, multiple products and regions. And so it might be easier said than done to go and support a particular deal here or there. And so what I want to show in the data here is how we can scale our efforts. And I think the first place we look is looking at how a tougher business environment has somewhat exposed top performers and lower performers. What we found is that over 3/4, so 76% of the revenue leaders we surveyed found that in these tougher times, they're seeing a greater gap between their top performers and their low performers on the team. Again, it's like that saying that goes, a rising tide lifts all boats, but now the tide is coming down and it's showing who's not wearing any swim trunks, if you will. And so the idea here is, by looking at at performance with a very sober view, you're able to see the top performing sellers and the low performing sellers, which will inform your competitive intelligence and competitive enablement strategies. You're able to more clearly see the reps that are winning competitive deals and the reps that are not winning competitive deals. Let's dive into a little bit more data here before we jump into takeaways, because I think this is a really important concept, or I guess thing that is happening right now that we're seeing across the board. We then asked our revenue leaders to think about how their sales teams are performing. So it was an interesting set of questions, not just about their revenue leaders and their thoughts on the business, but how do you think your reps are performing? And so this, I thought, was an interesting set of data. We found that 72% of leaders say that their reps truly understand their differentiators, and 61% of revenue leaders think that their reps understand their competitors' differentiators. So all in all, the majority of leaders feel like their sales teams have a good understanding of what makes them different, what makes the competitors different. However, only 30% of revenue leaders were confident that their reps can show their differentiated value effectively. And so I think this is a really interesting gulf that has emerged between knowing and executing. And that this, again, might seem a bit daunting at first, but it presents a really strong opportunity for us as competitive enablement professionals, because we can help the team kind of raise the 30% or close that gulf between knowing and executing. Last but not least, I want to share this very interesting data point around blind spots. Nearly half of revenue leaders felt that their company's salespeople are picking up on competitors in their deals during the negotiation stage or later. And I know every business has slightly different sales stages, but really the takeaway is that a lot of sales reps are picking up on the competition too late in the deals. And in fact, 13% of revenue leaders felt like their salespeople often aren't even sure who they competed against after the deal closes. And again, this concept of having a blind spot should terrify a lot of sales leaders, that there could be competitors that are winning deals that they don't even know are present in those deals. And so what can we take away on this? Again, before I shared a few actionable tips on how we can tactically and directly influence deals, but I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, hey, that's great, but we're a team of one or a team of three, or we're a small team enabling hundreds, if not thousands of sellers. So how do we scale that? And so I want to share 3 things that we're seeing some of the most mature compete programs doing in order to drive that differentiation at scale. The first is perhaps the most obvious. I'm sure a lot of you have battle cards. Taking time to not only update them, but to relaunch them. And I think this is really important because, again, as competitive intelligence practitioners, we often think, hey, we need to keep content up to date. And that obviously comes with its own set of challenges, but we sometimes do that quietly. And I think there is huge value in turning this into almost a launch of itself. Think about a marketing campaign or a product launch within your company. There would be enablement, there would be communications throughout the company. You would be announcing this change and this new information as far and as wide as possible. And so by relaunching your competitive battle cards and saying, hey, we've refreshed this content, this is going to help you win more deals, that's what's going to help reach those hundreds and thousands of sellers when you make a significant change to your differentiation or simply refresh the content and make sure that it's up to date. Secondly, we want to build systems to support a collaborative sales culture. Now, this is getting a bit more into the art versus the science, I'd say, of competitive. But the idea here is building mechanisms where sellers can contribute and provide feedback into your program. Again, what we hear time and time again is a compete team is 1, maybe 2, maybe 5, if you're lucky, 10 people. But and on the other side, sometimes it's not even a full-time job for many people. They're leading product marketing or strategic intelligence more broadly. We do not have time to support hundreds, if not thousands, of sellers in the same degree. And so what we've seen the most successful compete teams do is leverage the fact that you have thousands of sellers. These are sellers that are speaking with your market and your customers every single day. And so having them listening and sharing competitive intelligence is going to make your life so much easier. Not only that, they're going to be hearing things that you simply cannot find online. They're going to be hearing about competitors' new product launches or rumors or pricing changes or difficulties with competitive solutions and providers that you wouldn't be able to find online. Yes, you need to validate those things. Yes, there's still work involved, but just imagine having, if you have a sales team of 1,000, you have a team of 1,000 people with their ears on the ground listening for good competitive intel that they can share back to you. And so just to dive deeper, because I know I'm kind of speaking, like I said, a little bit in theory here, some of the practical things you can do. If you don't have one already, set up a Slack or Microsoft Teams channel where people can converse and share that intel. Make it easy for them to share intel. Furthermore, share intel yourself. Use that channel and create activity in that channel by sending updates there. You could do that through a newsletter, as an example, if you don't do one already. Here's what's happened in the past week or the past month with our competitors that you should know. Here's a quick roundup of news. In that newsletter, give shout outs to the sellers that are sharing intel. Maybe there's only 1 or 2 right now, but if you give them shout outs, I promise, I used to be a sales professional myself. Sales reps love being recognized, and it's not just monetary recognition that they value. So just giving them, seeing their name in the newsletter, hey, shout out to Jennifer, shout out to Brandon for sharing intel. That is going to encourage this collaborative sales culture, and you're going to start seeing the fruits of that labor over time. It's not an overnight fix, but I promise you it will start to snowball, and you'll start seeing these feedback loops start to form. And next up is partnering with marketing and or product to develop differentiated collateral. And I think this is really important. The analogy that I often find myself using in our own competitive program here at Clue is like digging for oil, right? If you were a prospector in, the 1800s of America and you had this vast land in front of you and you were digging for oil, you were digging holes. If you dug a hole and found a little bit of oil, you would not stop digging and go to another place to find another hole. You would keep digging in that spot. And so where this analogy applies is if you find something that works against your competitor, what I mentioned in that earlier slide, maybe you find a talk track or a question or a customer story that a sales rep is using that's really working, you can then build scale around that thing. You can continue digging for oil. And so that might be turning that story into a full-on case study. That might be building a competitive landing page on your website or a one-page downloadable asset based on some of that differentiation. And so it's taking something that's working for a particular rep and scaling that through a marketing asset. And that's something that can then live on, that won't require your one-on-one effort to support individual reps or individual teams. And so I think these are just three of the ways that you can take things that are working in a small scale and then scale that to a very, very large revenue organization. I'm going to flip to the chat here just to see questions. I see Jen from the Clue team is answering a lot of these questions, so appreciate you, Jen. But yeah, keep them coming. I think, like I said, want to keep make sure that this is, if you have any questions and you're thinking them, other people listening in to the webinar are likely thinking the similar questions. And so please don't be shy. Next up, I want to talk about perhaps one of the most important findings from our research. Just over half of revenue leaders are saying that their organization are quantifying the lost revenue to each competitor within their market. Now, to us, this is a huge red flag. This is telling us that almost half, the other 48%, are not doing this. They're not quantifying how much revenue they're losing to their competitors in the market. And if you've followed Clue at all, you know that we refer to this as your competitive revenue gap. It's out of all the potential revenue that we could have captured, how much of that revenue is going directly to a competitor. And we see that as a golden opportunity for compete teams to impact revenue. Again, these are buyers that had a need, evaluated vendors, went through perhaps a very long and extensive evaluation process or RFP. They set aside budget, they found the budget, they built a business case, and then they went with another solution. That is revenue that is prime that you and your team could win. And I think there's a key piece here as well, which is that within this revenue as well, there are certainly deals, I want to be clear, that or buyers that were a better fit for the competition, but there are also buyers that could have used your solution. And that's really where we see competitive enablement teams having the most impact. It's how can we capture the market share that we should have won? And so this lost revenue, I think, is really important for us. And again, I would say one of the most important takeaways from our research. And so I want to dive into this. If you are a Clue customer, you might already be aware of this, but we've just launched competitive analytics in Clue, which allows you to upload a CSV file from your CRM into Clue, and it will automatically calculate your competitive revenue gap. If you have Clue users, if you've already rolled out battle cards and a newsletter to your sales team, we'll show you how much revenue you've influenced. And the idea here is to really help you prioritize your efforts. We know that competitive enablement, competitive intelligence teams often have tons of priorities and tons of competitors that they could focus on. We want to really shine a spotlight on where we can have the biggest impact on revenue. Furthermore, we're going to be able to break down, your sellers that are using your content versus the sellers that are not using your content, and showing how that's impacting their competitive win rates or their average deal size, or how quickly or slowly they're closing deals. So we can actually quantify those metrics for you. There's a lot more that's in the reports. I won't bore you with the details, but the idea here really is to quantify and show, hey, here are the competitors that are having the biggest impact on revenue, and so that you can take these results that are quantified and data-driven from your CRM to inform your program. Because the last thing, a common thing that we hear from teams is that they aren't able to quantify the impact that they're having. And so this, again, is a way to take that data from your CRM, upload it to Clue, and get a report that shows exactly that. Oh, I got some animations on this one. Forgot about that. A couple things I just want to share here. Again, whether you're using Clue or not, just in general, by quantifying the ROI of your program and the impact on revenue. Again, we think that this is the most important thing to be doing right now. We're hearing the same notion from, from small companies all the way to large enterprises like Dan Hamilton, VP of Competitive Intelligence at Salesforce, who says that by being on sales calls, by supporting deals, that's how he's able to get a seat at the executive table. And I think if it can work for Dan, it can work for you, it can work for me. I think the three main benefits for us as Compete Pros is it gives us career progression and visibility. It gives executive teams something to pay attention to and say, oh my gosh, competitive intelligence is impacting revenue. We are competitively enabling our sales teams to win more business. And that is unique data and a unique narrative that I can tell you from my experience. I personally have been invited to meetings and been brought into rooms that I would not have had access to were it not for showing the quantified ROI of our Compete program. And last but not least, it helps you really focus on what matters. Again, we have tons of competitors. And for those of you that work at large enterprises, I'm sure it's even more complex with different regions and products and business units. And so being able to really laser focus on the competitors that are going to have the most impact on revenue today, that is going to help you kind of own your destiny and not let competitors sway where you end up in the market. And we really see this as a way of driving your company forward through any tough times. There's a great quote that I don't have in the slides here, but this was a quote from the race car driver Ayrton Senna, who's considered one of the best race car F1 drivers of all time. This quote, I can't take full credit for finding it. This was shared by Sequoia Capital to their portfolio companies. And basically the quote was, you can't pass 15 cars in sunny weather, but you can in rainy weather. And what he was saying is when times are tough, this is the time that you can overtake the competition. This applies in race car driving and this applies in business as well. And so last but not least, again, Clue product and our platform aside, even if you're not using Clue, even if you're not using any software, we do recommend calculating your competitive revenue gap. On our website, if you go to clue.com/calculator, you can actually calculate your revenue gap just by dropping in a couple of figures. You can use estimates and we'll show you the results live on the screen and you can email yourself a report. But again, what we really want to be clear on here is impacting revenue is what matters right now. This is what executive teams are talking about. This is what board teams and board members are talking about in those board meetings. It's how can we impact revenue this quarter and next quarter? And I think we are in a very unique and powerful position as competitive enablement professionals to impact revenue in a way that is not very costly and can have a huge impact on the outcomes in our market. And so check out the calculator. I can see that Jen has already dropped it in the chat. And that is everything for the presentation. Like I said, I'm going to stick around for Q&A if people have questions, but would love to connect with you if you found value in this, or if you have questions, or if you want the deck, as mentioned. We're happy to share that with you. Hopefully the takeaway here is not one of doom and gloom. It's that in these challenging times, there's a ton of opportunity. And, as a competitive enablement professional myself, I think it's a very exciting time to help elevate the business, to help elevate my own career quite selfishly, and really drive the business outcomes forward in a way that not many other people within my organization can. So hopefully this is helpful, and I will jump into the chat here and scroll around for some questions to answer.
Hey, Brandon, I wanted to point out one for you that Ryan submitted, and Sheila has some commentary as well. So Ryan asked, in large organizations, how do you get visibility to your competitive wins and losses? And I love the extra comment, assume our CRM is imperfect. Most CRM data is imperfect, Ryan. It's okay. So yeah, maybe we'll start there. And then Sheila had some similar sentiments for working for a global company with this challenge as well.
Totally. No, I appreciate the question, Ryan, and your comment at the end tells me that you've tried this before. And first thing, as Jen kind of commented on as well, I'll share that you're not alone. Like most organizations, CRM data is imperfect. One of the other reports I didn't touch on in competitive analytics, again, you don't have to use Clue to do this, but it will try to identify those gaps. So Clue will automatically show, hey, here's how much data you have, and here's how much is missing when it comes to competitive data. Anyways, Clue aside, if CRM data is tough, and assuming you're doing what you can to improve CRM data, I think a great place to start is interviewing and surveying buyers. Now, this is, of course, a larger lift effort, right? Many people refer to this as a win-loss program. You might have another team within your organization already conducting these interviews. That might be the first place to start, because we find that unlike competitive intelligence, which tends to be fairly centralized, there's a team that supports competitive intelligence across the business. Win-loss programs can exist in pockets. And so, this, for example, your sales team, your sales leaders or sales enablement team might be doing this already. They might already be conducting a win-loss program. But in short, what that means is interviewing and surveying buyers to speak directly to them. The added benefit, by the way, of this is that you're circumventing like the sales point of view, right? Like if you look at CRM data, you'd be pretty hard pressed to find a sales rep that says that they lost because of the sales experience, right? Everything's being passed on through the sales rep on why they thought they lost the deal. And so by going directly to the buyers, again, perhaps through interviews, there are ways that you can obviously incentivize this. I won't go too much in depth on that, but having some sort of win-loss program, I think, is a great way to start capturing those clues. And then you can use something like a survey to then confirm or get a larger sample size once you have a hypothesis there. But I do think a win-loss program versus as opposed to just win-loss data from CRM is a great way to do that. Awesome question. And then Jen, you said, sorry, Sheila, I share the same comment Ryan made. I work for a global company with a challenge to engage with client-facing people to fill the fields and competitors' information. It's, again, super common. And so, yeah, hopefully that like the win-loss program, whether it's interviewing or surveying, helps you there. The other thing too, and maybe just worth double-clicking on what I meant there around with that Clue feature, is we can actually show which sales reps are not logging their competitor fields in CRM. We can show which teams, which managers you might need to speak to. Hey, Kala, your team is not logging the competitor field as often as this other team. Again, you don't need Clue to do that. If you can work with your CRM admin or someone with Salesforce Access, it really what we're trying to answer there is, are there any gaps in CRM data that we can improve through enablement or through stronger compliance? But yeah, I think in an ideal world, you can approach both, improve CRM data while still getting qualitative data from interviews and surveys. I think I saw another question towards the end there. Ankit, what are some key showcase CI team members can do to attract C-suites? Hopefully I understand your question, but it's basically how can we get more visibility with executive teams? I think, one in large part, again, Clue or not Clue, having revenue metrics, showing dollar figures, saying, hey, this is how much revenue we've influenced, or even simpler, as mentioned earlier with the calculator, here's how much revenue we're losing to competitors or competitor X or competitor Y. That is going to capture executive team's attention, especially any revenue leaders, Chief Revenue Officer, VP of Sales, VP of Customer Success or Renewals. Showing revenue numbers, I think, is a great way to attract that attention. And then the other one, again, I'm stealing this from Dan at Salesforce. He mentions having insights that are coming from the field. That's like a really great way to capture to get a seat at the executive table, because your executives also are, they're even busier. They don't have time to listen in on customer calls or buyer conversations. And so bringing some of those insights and saying, hey, this is what we're hearing on the front lines, on the outermost edges of the organization. We're hearing competitor X is doing this and our product is resonating because of Y. Those are great insights that you can bring to the executive level, because those are going to be unique insights that, again, your sales team might be hearing that you can kind of feed up the chain. And so I think those are two ways you can do it, but just to stay on theme here is we really recommend looking at revenue metrics and dollar figures, because we're hearing a lot of executive teams. I mean, let's be honest, revenue leaders always care about revenue, but especially now, it's particularly important to focus there. Let's see, there's another question here by Ryan. Any example for newsletters or topics to establish that connection with the field org and begin providing them value? This is a great question, and I'll provide, I want to just share that, like, take this with a grain of salt, because I think this will differ depending on your organization, depending on broad your organization is, how many different teams there are. But I can share just from my personal experience, what's worked well with us is there are, firstly, competitive wins and losses. Everyone loves to hear, hey, why did we win or why did we lose a deal? So spotlighting that, I think, is one great way. Another is if there's a big competitive event that happens, right? Let's say a competitor gets acquired or raises a new round of funding, including in your newsletter, not just the event, but why it matters to us as a business, right? So if one of our competitors got acquired, which actually this happened earlier this year, one of our competitors merged with another competitor, it's one thing to share, hey, this happened. It was another thing to say, hey, this happened, and here's Clue's take on it. Here's where we think what this means maybe for our market. Here's maybe how sales can speak to this if you're being asked about so-and-so competitor being acquired. And so having that, we call it why it matters. We've heard some companies call it like, what's in it for me? It's really speaking directly to the seller, because again, salespeople are busy. They're busy selling all day. They want to hear the news, but they also want to kind of hear your take on it, right? And I think, the other kind of subtle takeaway there is to really, maybe you already do this, Ryan, but I found this is really helpful for me, is remember that you are a subject matter expert, and that, even if things are quiet, even if sales reps aren't, particularly loud, like I'm sure a lot of them look to you as an expert for the competitive landscape. And so really kind of owning that and sharing your point of view is a great way to build confidence in, from the team that, hey, Ryan has something really important to share this week. I want to go listen to that, and I want to engage. Awesome. Looks like the chat is slowing down a bit, but we still do have a little bit of time, so I'm happy to stick around if anyone thinks of anything. Hopefully this was all valuable, and like I said, connect with me on LinkedIn, share questions if you think of something afterwards. Would love your feedback, what resonated, what didn't. But yeah, hopefully this is valuable intel. And as mentioned, I think Jen posted this already in the chat there. But what we've also done is kind of taken these findings and tried to build this into a business case template. And so again, whether or not you're using Clue as a software or as a service, this template should be something that you can start with and piece together yourself. You just fill in kind of the data points that you might look for. The idea here is we looked at what are the most successful programs doing when they're building a business case for their compete programs, when they're trying to show revenue impact, and we wanted to turn that into a downloadable asset that you can use right away. And as Jen mentioned, the full report. So today you've seen some kind of a preview of some of the findings. We're going to release that full report, aiming for the first week of June. So keep an eye out for that. Like I said, connect with us on LinkedIn, and you'll be the first to hear about it.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you to Brandon and Jen. And thank you everyone for attending, and we hope to see you at future webinars. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.